we're going to look now at more or less the archaeological evidence of what we find in Jerusalem so that you can kind of see what a Bronze Age city was like, although Jerusalem was kind of a small one. Okay? And then we'll look at Melchizedek and the texts and things related to him, and then we'll look at some broad characteristics of ancient Near Eastern civilization. So we've got 3 different topics here. Now, before about 3,000, 3,500 BC, there was no city of Jerusalem. As far as we can tell, there was some human habitation in the area of hunter-gatherers. They were attracted to a thing called the Gihon Spring, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, but it is a water source. It's a natural aquifer spring that comes out at the base of the ridge that Jerusalem is built on. And so the hunter-gatherer types hunted in this area and came to the water at the spring because the animals come to the water, and so, you know, it's a good place to do hunting. We know that because of something just discovered in the past couple of weeks, and these are 2 little figurines. They're about a little smaller than the size of your hand. They date from several thousand years BC, and they seem to be figurines of animals. This one's pretty clearly a ram or some sort, right, or a goat or something like that. And this one, they're not quite sure what it is, but it's clearly carved. I mean, it's not a natural thing, and they think it's some type of animal. And these were found near Jerusalem, probably carved by hunter-gatherers who were, hunting in the region. So this indicates there was human habitation, but not cities. The city doesn't come till about 3,500, 3,000 BC, something like that. We get the first evidence of cities. Now, part of the problem here, is, of course, is there's very sparse evidence from this period. So there may be a lot more that was going on, but this is what has been discovered. Could have been a lot more than this. So when Jerusalem is finally founded as a city, it's founded down on this ridge. Now that blue spot is the Gihon Spring. That's the best water supply in the region, within 10 miles or 20 miles of Jerusalem. It's a perennial spring. Lots of water comes out of it. It flows down the Kidron Valley, and you can farm this whole valley based on this water supply. Now this is the old city of Jerusalem today. See, those walls represent the old city. This is the Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock, and so forth. We'll be talking about some of this stuff later on. But as far as we can tell, this was not part of the city during the earliest time. It was only in this area. And there's lots of archaeological evidence of a Bronze Age city here, but none up in this area. Although maybe, it hasn't been discovered yet. Who knows? Now, we can trace, broadly speaking, the walls of the Canaanite city. In this orange color shows you more or less the enclosure of the city in that period. Of course, Jerusalem today is much larger. It extends, 5 or 6 miles in most directions around the old city today. So this is what's called the Gihon Spring, that blue dot there. Now this is very important. As I said, it's the main water supply. Later on, they figured out other ways to bring in water supplies through channeling and cisterns and things like that. But what is the name of the spring? Gihon, so what? That's one of the names of the 4 rivers of paradise, right? When you read the Eden account, it says the 4 rivers flowed out from Eden and watered the world, and one's called the Gihon. And so what is likely happened is that the Israelites renamed the spring here the Gihon because it is associated with the Temple Mount. It flows from the base of the Temple Mount, and therefore is symbolically one of these rivers of paradise. Okay? During the Christian era and the Arab era, it's called the Well of Miriam, the Well of Mary, the mother of Jesus. And but the Israelis call it Gihon. Okay, and that's what's called in the Old Testament. So the late 4th millennium BC, we see no real city, just settlements, agricultural settlements. We had evidence of hunters with those animal figurines earlier. Now we see there's a village there, but there's no city walls. It's not a city. It's a small little village farming community that grows up around this spring. All right? How big it was, we don't really know. I mean, it's a small village, and we only have a little bit of evidence from it. For example, this is a excavation that revealed down here a small house. You can see it's pretty small, right? Of somebody from the 4th millennium, about 3000 BC, maybe a little later. So very early on, it's just a small little village. We do have some pottery from this era. Now, what does pottery indicate? Usually indicates agriculture, because pots were invented as a means to store food and prevent grain from getting wet and getting eaten by rats or something. So pottery probably indicates agriculture, but are these pots agriculturally oriented? Does this have an agricultural purpose for these particular pots? No. What are they? They're lamps. The way this worked is you made a round basin, just a little cup, and you would use those cups if it was just purely round to drink some water out of or something. Okay? So the bowl for soup or water. And people didn't have cups like we do to drink water. They used bowls originally just for any type of liquid. But what they did is pinched it here. Now, why did they pinch it there? Is it to make the water flow out better? What do you see there? It's a black mark of some sort. What is that? It's soot. Yeah, this is an oil lamp. You fill that basin with oil, you put a wick in there, and the wick will you light it and it burns, it sucks the oil up and it burns like a candle, only it's an oil lamp. So these are the earliest oil lamps we have from Jerusalem, and you can see the soot left over on this one. Now a lot of these survive only broken. That is, say they're busted up when when you have them. But a couple of them survive well. These are other types of pottery. This would be something to carry water in, maybe wine, and this would be a basin for cooking food or eating out of, or storing tomatoes, or I guess they didn't have tomatoes, but olives or something. Okay. We also find some things like this. This dates from maybe the time of Melchizedek or so, 2000 BC, 1500 BC, something like that. What is this? It's a ring. You can see that so this is blown up quite a bit. The person would put his finger through there, but this thing flips around. It's kind of on a swivel or pivot. And this is a seal, and you would carry that on your finger, and then you could stamp things with it, and would make your mark. Okay, so it's what's called a seal. When we talk about sealing in the Old Testament, they're talking about things like this. They're little pieces of stone that they carve a symbol or a writing on, and they stamp clay with it, and it marks something. And usually it marks possession. So when it says that the Lord seals you his, it means he stamped you with his mark, and you belong to him. You're the Lord's. This was often done with slaves. They would mark them with maybe a tattoo, or sometimes they'd have a necklace that would have a seal of the master on it. So slaves would be marked, sealed in that way as well. But this one was on a finger. But notice, it's all Egyptian. That's the symbol for Nefer. This is the symbol of a bee. This is Egyptian hieroglyphic writing that they're using on this. So either this guy got it in Egypt, or some Egyptians were there and had that. This is a cylinder seal. This is a different way to do it. Here you just stamp it directly, but here they made them in cylinders. It's about the thickness of a pencil or so, and it's only like an inch or two long. And it has on it, you carve a picture on it, and then you roll it across a piece of clay, and it leaves the impression. And if you keep rolling it, you'll just go over and over again. You'll repeat the same image over and over again. But this was another way they made seals. These are called cylinder seals. And you can see that this seal has been rolled on this piece of clay, and there's a figure of, this figure right here is that. But it goes mirror image when you roll it, right? It flips over opposite. Now this is hard to figure out what's going on here, but what have you got? Okay, there's a tree of life symbol. This figure is probably a god figure with a staff in his hand representing power and authority of some sort. This is maybe an altar where they're offering something to the god, and this then is probably just a human being. I mean, nobody knows for sure. This is just, it is speculation based on parallels with better known and better explained seals. Okay, here's another seal, and this figure is a little bit more clear. What's this? There's a seat, and there's a figure on it. So this is a throne, and again, this is the clay, these are about an inch long. It's a piece of clay, you just stamp it in it. You can see that, okay? Notice what's over here. Probably a fingerprint. We actually have the fingerprint of Baruch, the scribe of Jeremiah, on one of the seals. I'll show you that later on. It's kind of cool, the actual fingerprint of Baruch. Anyway, this is a guy seated on a throne. Who would that be? Either the king or a god. I mean, those are the figures that sit enthroned in ritual scenes. Now, if you look at this particular scene, what is that? That's facsimile 3 from the book of Abraham, right? You have an enthroned figure. You have courtiers or people encountering, meeting this enthroned figure. Now notice, this symbol here pops up on this particular seal in the Jerusalem area from about the time of Abraham. So you've got then these types of symbolic use of images and seals. Okay? So this would be an enthroned figure, god or king or important person of some sort. So there you've got that particular figure represented. And then here, this is a presentation scene, and we'll talk about presentation scenes more later, but it's this type of thing where standing figures encounter each other in some type of ritual setting. So these are all coded, symbolic use representing ritual relationships between gods and kings, or humans and other humans, or kings and humans, or whatever it might be. The symbols are kind of static, but their relationship will change depending on who's on the throne and who's standing, and all these different types of things. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Now, the earliest mention of Jerusalem as a city comes from the 19th century BC. So this is about the time of Abraham, maybe a century or two before Abraham. And this is what's called a execration text. Now, that may sound kind of strange, but execration means cursing. This is a cursing text. This is made by the Egyptians, and it's in Egyptian. They made a clay figurine that looked like a person, very roughly. And then they wrote on it in ink, and you can barely see it. It's very, very faint, but you can pick it up that there's writing in ink on this. And, if you get a microscope and, use photography that highlights things, that you can read it. And what it did was name all the different rulers of Canaan. And it cursed them. Say, may they be stricken, may they die, may they have no children, whatever it is. The Egyptians then made this, and it's about this big. It's essentially a voodoo doll. You write the name of the thing you want to curse, and then you break it. You can see it's all cracked here. That's because they, smashed it, and that essentially sent the curse. And of all, there's a whole bunch of kings named, city-states named, of which one is Yakaramu, who is the king of Jerusalem, the ruler of Jerusalem. And he's stricken. They want to curse him, right? Okay? So this is the earliest textual reference to the city of Jerusalem that we know about. That is, archaeologically speaking. Yes?
My dad's went to and my great-grandma used to do this.
Is that right?
She had this, everyone in the trial, and my dad went to the mall, and she cursed my dad.
Uh-oh. Is your dad okay? Yeah, so it's still done. I mean, in lots of different tribes. That's very interesting, though. But it's essentially the same idea. And it goes back 5,000 years or more, and it's still done. I mean, you can do voodoo stuff down in New Orleans, right? If you so choose. But I've never met somebody who's been cursed by a... That's pretty awesome. All right. Hope it didn't work. Now, we also have then, the next earliest reference is to Melchizedek, who probably dates about 1800 BC. So he's around this time, maybe a little earlier than this, maybe probably a little after. And we don't have much information about him. We're going to talk about him more later. But this is in a text from Genesis, and it's just a very vague recollection of this king who was the king of Jerusalem. His name means righteous king, or my king is righteous. The Hebrew is ambiguous. There's two different ways you can read it. Melchizedek, and it is, he's called king of Jerusalem, and he's called the priest of El Elyon, which is translated Most High God. El means God, and Elyon means the highest, the most elevated, so Most High. Okay? And so, we have the name of this king, we have the name of this king. And so this is just little fragmentary stuff, right? Very little data. We also have some walls that survive from the city during this period. That is, the whole wall here doesn't survive. Only little bits and fragments of it survive. And the reason for that is the stones are reused. When the wall collapses in an earthquake or something, they drag the stones off, use it to rebuild stuff. So most of these old buildings don't survive because they are used as quarries to take the stone to build something else. Does that make sense? And this still goes on in Jerusalem today. I mean, you can find buildings in Jerusalem that have stones that date back 2,000 years that are stuck in their wall. They've just found this old stone lying on the ground from an earthquake, picked it up, built with it. Yeah?
When you're dating these different walls, because it doesn't seem like they're following the same pattern. They're not building these walls right on top of each other. Right?
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Just depends on the circumstance. So sometimes they have to build them bigger because the town has grown, they want to have the wall out further, and just depends. Go ahead.
So are they dating these walls as in reference to the things around them?
Okay, I'll explain how they date the wall in just a second. Okay? Anyway, that's more or less the area of the wall, and this orange dot shows you what we're going to look at. Now that's the wall from the time of Melchizedek, early 2nd millennium BC. We can't date it better than that. Now, can you date rock like that, archaeologically? How do you date it? No, you can't do radiometric dating on rocks because it has to be something that was alive, that has carbon in it. In fact, you can't. There's no way to say when a human being put that rock there because rocks aren't dated. Now, if the rock was carved in a certain way with certain symbols or certain patterns on it, you might be able to date that. But the way they do it is excavate underneath the rocks. They kind of dig underneath and they find pottery or some type of carbon-based thing, and then they date that. And if the rock is on top of that, say you find a piece of pottery under here and a piece of wood under here, as you're excavating out. You take those and they're underneath the foundation, so you kind of got to dig underneath some of it and tear some of it away sometimes. They'll destroy the wall to date it. But at any rate, when you find those things, then you date those things, and the wall has to date after that because it's on top of those things, and so that's the way you date the wall. Okay? But dating just a piece of rock like that is very hard. Because you can find walls in contemporary, Palestine that look just like that were made, 50 years ago by some guy to, block off his orchard or something, mark his property. Because it's just a pile of rocks, right? At any rate, from the method I talked about, we date those to the Bronze Age. They also built a big, right by the Gihon Spring, they built a tower to protect it, and they built a water tunnel to divert the water into some cisterns that they wanted. Now, this is the base of the tower that dates from the time of Melchizedek. You can see these are much bigger stones than these. Why is that? Because the towers are the most important military feature, and you want to build them bigger and stronger because they're the most important to defend. And the reason for that is they have gates in the towers, and the gate is a mechanism to get in, so that's where the people are going to attack the most, to break down the gate, so you want the tower the strongest. Does that make sense? Just a military issue. At any rate, here's the base of that tower, and what's shaded in red here is essentially what's left of this. It's this part right here. And it's right by the spring. The spring is just on the other side of this. I mean, all of this has been dug out by the archaeologists, and you can see a bunch of cement here. That does not date to the time of Melchizedek. That was added by Israelis as they excavated to keep, the houses and stuff above this. This is all underground. I mean, it's like 50 feet underground. So this modern thing is to bring air to the archaeologists as they're tunneling around. So they actually tunnel, like you're doing a mine or something, to do some of this archaeology. Now, this is the water tunnel. This goes off right near this gate here, this tower. There's a channel they dug through the rock to take the water so it didn't flow out of the city but flowed into reservoirs within the city, because its natural flowing was to go out into the valley and then they'd use it to irrigate. So this is a water tunnel system that they used to just channel the water. There's another one that was built by Hezekiah in the 8th century BC. This one's 14th century, something like that. It's almost 1,000 years earlier than the other tunnel. Okay, any questions? That's essentially the data we have about Jerusalem in the Bronze Age. That's it. I mean, a couple of references in a couple of texts, a few bits of pottery, these walls, that tunnel. That's it. You know everything there is to know about Bronze Age Jerusalem, which is very little. And that's the way it is in most places. The amount of data we have is extremely small, and we just take these bits and pieces and try to fit them together.